Hi, we want to try something new. You can be part of it, because we want to introduce it right now. We also want to explain a little bit why there have been so few videos on Diaper TV lately. Let's also take a look at the future. There are some exciting plans and innovations in store for 2026. Let's start at the beginning. I am Linux. Okay, now we can begin. First of all, how did this new format come about? As you've probably noticed, podcasts have experienced a renaissance. The technology is certainly quite old. It's been around for over 20 years. In between, they went through a slump where they weren't very popular. But now, for several years, they've been more popular than ever. This is certainly also due to the fact that more and more popular platforms are offering them, e.g., Spotify, which didn't have them at all or hardly any until a few years ago. I also have a few that I listened to privately and thought it would be a good idea to try it out, because it would allow us to reach more people and perhaps even new ones. I also think that podcasts give us the opportunity to cover certain topics in more detail and depth, and perhaps even topics where we say, that's enough for a video, let's make a podcast out of it instead. The reason for this is that I assume we can produce podcasts much faster and therefore make them more frequently. All the effort that goes into making a video is eliminated because it's audio. Sure, we still have a bit of work to do, but significantly less. I should perhaps explain this briefly, because I myself felt the same way before I started making videos. I had no idea how much effort was involved. If you have a video that's 5 or 10 minutes long, that's already much more than you might imagine. On the one hand, we have the ones we film ourselves, practical tests, where we first have to set everything up because we don't have a studio, just private rooms, mostly my bed. That means we first have to clear everything out, set up what we want to film, put up lights, cameras, and so on, so that we can do the rough cuts there. Then, of course, everything has to be dismantled again. Obviously, that takes time too. That's why we usually do several recordings at the same time, so that we don't have to set everything up again for a practical test, for example, but instead set it up and then film 2 or 3 times, depending on how much time we have, so that we can make better use of it. Then we move on to editing, where we also have various things to do. First, we have to check whether the lighting is right, for example, and whether we need to correct a few things. Sometimes the videos don't turn out so well, especially when you're trying something new. We make corrections accordingly. Then we move on to our script. That can also be quite a bit of work in some cases. First, we have to summarize everything we've found out. Then there's the research, which depends on the type of video. For example, if we want to compare different diapers, we have to check everything first to make sure we can report it correctly. How long that takes depends heavily on the topic, how much has already been prepared, how much work is left to do, and so on. That's why it's impossible to give a general answer. But as a rule of thumb, you can assume that it will take at least a day. There is another difficulty that has more to do with the topic itself. We don't really have any visual material for some things. Sure, when we test diapers, we do it ourselves. That's not a problem. But when we report on events, we're often not allowed to film, so we just have screenshots from the website. If it takes place in a club, we find pictures there that show, let's say, normal everyday operations. Of course, none of this is perfectly tailored, which makes it much more difficult for us to create a video that offers added value and shows you how the whole thing works. So I can imagine that this format also has its advantages here, where you have little or no image material. The last point is that we are operating on commercial social networks. There we have the problem that we naturally have to perform in the new German, because the primary concern of the platform is that you consume as much as possible. This means that marketing and playback time determine success or failure, so we have to make sure that we get to the point in the videos, even though there are other interesting things to talk about. But some viewers aren't interested in those, which means that the playback time drops, which is detrimental to our reach, because our goal is, of course, to reach as many people as possible. So there's always a certain conflict that comes into play. That's why we're thinking about separating these formats. We don't want to completely replace the classic videos, but rather supplement them with new ones that will continue as you know them. Just with one detail, viewers have probably already heard this. From now on, we will be using our own voices for our videos, because our biggest criticism was that we used an artificial voice that basically read the text aloud instead of our own voices. I would like to add that this was the most common criticism. We attend events and often talk to people and tell them about Diaper TV. We also ask for feedback. Surprisingly, we received very little, so most or a large majority are satisfied with what we do. There were more specific requests. For example, one person said they would like to see more clothing, ABDL clothing. Yes, we'll have to see how we can incorporate that, because of course with clothing we have something permanent, so we'll definitely do something about that, but it won't be the main focus. We still have the bodysuit, for example. The one with the little lion, it's from Rears. We'll have to test that one out. Unfortunately, we haven't had time yet, but we'll definitely make a video, because so far we only have a black one. That was the subtle one I used for the office. So, if you don't want it to stand out, it looks like a t-shirt from the outside. And another colorful one, no, that's Safari, the one that's packaged, the one we still want to make, but the one with the green border. Yes, I think it's from NRU. In any case, we still have a colorful bodysuit with animal motifs, and there's another one coming, and a gray and white striped bodysuit. You're right, I completely forgot about that one. That was the very first one. It was originally intended for the same purpose as the black one, namely to be inconspicuous. Unfortunately, because it's relatively light in color, it has a problem, namely that you can still see through it relatively well. That's why it didn't quite work out. So we have a total of 3 bodysuits now. But back to the point. So there was actually relatively little criticism. Most people were satisfied, but among those who did express criticism, the most common point was that they didn't like the voice. I can understand that to a certain extent. I think it's fine in itself. The only thing is, of course, that it lacks emphasis. It sounds like a newsreader reading something out relatively emotionlessly. Of course, when you have a human being speaking, it's a bit more dynamic because they behave like a human being and not like a machine. I can understand that point. What bothered me a little bit personally was that in some places he has problems with certain terms, especially terms from the ABDL scene. What regularly annoys me is Rears, for example. Of course, it's completely wrong, and that's stupid in terms of the tone, but also for the listeners or viewers, because they might write it down wrong and not find it at all. We have that in some places too, where we had to come up with workarounds to spell the word wrong so that the voice would read it correctly. In some cases, I gave up because it didn't work at all, so I had to rewrite the word. It doesn't happen in every sentence, but occasionally it was a bit annoying, which is why we thought about how we could solve this problem better. Especially with other voices, of course. The opportunity was there, and we had also put out a call to the people who complained in the comments, saying that we would like to work with them to add sound to the whole thing. A few people responded, but unfortunately nothing really came of it. Some of them weren't really serious or withdrew. One was pretty serious, but unfortunately didn't have a decent microphone. The sound quality was pretty awful, not because of him or his voice, but because he simply didn't have a good microphone. Obviously, if there's noise and interference and stuff like that, it has to be reasonably good so that we don't end up with poorer sound quality overall. A frequent comment from you was, why don't you do it yourselves? Just like now. That would be easiest. Sure, that's understandable, but the point we've been thinking about for a while is the social costs. I suspect that's the point, because if you follow the polls, there's a growing number of people who say you can no longer freely express your opinion in Germany, or at least you should be careful. That's not because we have radical laws that suddenly completely overturn freedom of expression, which is why you suffer any disadvantages. I'm exaggerating now, but in Russia, for example, if you criticize the war, you end up in prison and don't know when you'll get out, or if you'll get out at all. Fortunately, we are a long way from that, but there is still this feeling that it's better to be cautious, and in the end, that's the social cost. In principle, you can express any legal opinion, but that can have consequences. For example, friends, acquaintances, or even your boss might say that's not acceptable, we have to go our separate ways, and that's difficult, especially with your boss, of course. He has me economically dependent. Unfortunately, that's quite common, especially with issues like this. Now, a lot has changed for us, both privately and professionally. This didn't just happen, it's been planned for a long time. Preparations have been underway since 2024. This isn't primarily related to Diaper TV, but it does have a positive effect here in that the social costs are significantly lower, so we can say yes, we can take this step and make the whole thing even more open. That's why we want to try it out, but only on the German channel for now. This is an experiment. We're starting now. It was originally planned for December, but as we all know, plans are just plans. Unfortunately, I got sick and it lasted a long time. I still can't quite explain it. In any case, it got me, so of course the plan to record with our real voices for December and early January was off the table for the time being. That's what we originally wanted to do. As a plan B, I made the video for our year in review. I originally wanted to do that as one of the first tests with our real voices, because, of course, we've been building the format for a long time now with these scripts that we have recorded with the artificial voice, and now we have to see how it works, what works well, what doesn't work so well, so we have to start there. That has now all shifted in the chat groups. If you want to see something positive in this, it's what you may have already seen in picture form. I posted it on the community posts, namely that I significantly broke the record for full diapers during that time. It was huge, otherwise, I would have been swimming in full diapers in the truest sense of the word. But these things happen, there's nothing you can do about it. You have to take it as it comes. So now everything has been delayed. But now we're going full speed ahead, albeit a little late. In 2026, Diaper TV will not only continue, but in some areas it will really take off. Diaper TV has also grown into a larger network. First, we have the German YouTube channel Windel TV, which you all know. Then there is the English diaper channel, called Diaper TV, and the French language diaper channel, called Couche TV. So, we primarily make our videos for the German channel, Windel TV. Then we see which ones might also be interesting for others. For example, the practical tests, because of course it's not only Germans and people in Germany who wear diapers, but also people outside the German-speaking world, outside Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, for example in the USA, where there is a pretty big scene. And there's also a big scene in France, and a large diaper store comes from France, which I hope you all know. It's called Diaper Minister, and Diaper Minister celebrated its 10th anniversary in 2025. So we translate the videos that make sense for both channels. Now we have to see how we want to proceed. In any case, we would like to create some videos that we record with our real voices. We will probably start with 1 or 2 practical tests that are still pending. I have a few other topics to cover before we get to our highlight, because last year, in 2025, we filmed at the last Diaper Dungeon. Of course, without an audience, but we filmed during the setup, a few hours before the event started in the evening. We tried this approach at various events last year because, as I briefly mentioned earlier, the problem with these videos is that we have practically no footage, just a few pictures online. Sometimes you can find something on social media, but we don't really have good material to show the whole thing. Sometimes we have nothing at all. For example, with Frekdax, the footage is very, very sparse. So I was pleased that it worked out for Diaper Dungeon. Here, the process I described earlier continues. This means we now review the video footage and make adjustments if, for example, the brightness isn't quite right. But of course, it's very important here that we also censor people if they're visible. Naturally, we don't want to expose or endanger anyone. We've also been faced with another challenge, the increasingly radical surveillance capitalism. You might have noticed that they've almost completely cut off our reach on Instagram. For whatever reason, it's all so opaque. So, unfortunately, we're dependent on this platform and have to optimize our content as much as possible to minimize potential points of attack. This, of course, doesn't make things easier. In fact, it makes them even more time-consuming. Plus, there are the issues we've already mentioned, which is why things have been delayed. I'm sorry about that, but I'm looking forward to it, and we'll definitely tackle this video first. Just a few others before then, because I don't want to do that right away after such a major change. You know how it is when you start something new or make significant changes, the first attempts usually aren't as perfect as you'd hoped. As I already pointed out in the year-end review, 2025 was a record year for ABDL events. There have never been so many of them in Germany before. In 2026, there probably won't be quite as many. So we won't reach a new record there, but still plenty. That means lots of opportunities for you to meet us and other people from the scene. To that end, we created another one ourselves with a few friends who are also viewers, the ABDL Stammtisch, a regular meeting for people with disabilities in Stuttgart. It has a very unique feature. It's not a typical regular meeting like you'd usually find. Most of these meetups take place in a pub or bar, some kind of place where you can sit down. This is in public. So, of course, you can wear diapers there. You can do that anywhere, nobody will see you. But you can't show up in ABDL clothing or other fetish outfits. Puppy hoods aren't usually welcome either. Instead, you're expected to wear civilian, street-appropriate clothing. Of course, you can do that, but I don't find it a particularly practical or appropriate setting. It's more like when a swimming club meets for dry land training. They might do that sometimes to discuss tactics or organizational matters, but the actual swimming takes place in the water. You're in a swimming pool. That's exactly how I think it should ideally be for a BDL as well. That means they should be able to express themselves however they want in a private space. Plus, they need their own changing facilities, because when we're being carried, we have to change diapers. That's not possible in public spaces. Or maybe just sort of halfway through in the bathroom. That's all far from perfect in my opinion. That's why this concept convinced me, because it goes in a different direction. They said they want a private space that's practically exclusively for them. So, basically, you can wear whatever you want there. You can wear buddies, any other outfits, onesies, whatever, papa masks, no problem. They've also created a changing area, so it's the perfect environment. Plus, there's food and drink available. What convinced me about this was that it's not just another typical, run-of-the-mill meetup, but rather something in between classic meetups and those ABDL parties, where that's already the case, like at Diaper Dungeon or Frekdax. There, you can really let loose, you can dress however you want. There are changing stations, diapers, and so on. That's why it convinced me. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, I couldn't go because I got sick shortly before. So Chip had to stand in for me, this time alone. I helped a bit with the preparations. We also provided some diapers, made name tags, and a few other things. You can tell Chip a bit about how it went, what you experienced. I think quite a few people would be interested. Yes, exactly. So, man, the ABDS table starts at 5:30 p.m., or rather 5 p.m., and there are games, a cuddle corner, a beat table, and so on. You can meet up there, sit in the corner and, chat in the cuddle corner, or, sit at the bar, have a drink, or something to eat. Payment is handled via a so-called billing card. That means you pay at the end. It's basically the system you know from many nightclubs. Whether it's fetish nightclubs, like jails, where the dungeon event takes place, or regular nightclubs. Whether it's fetish nightclubs, like jails, where the dungeon event takes place, or regular nightclubs, they also use a prepaid card, and then you mark it off, or in the more modern ones, some kind of digital card, but it's always some kind of card where your consumption is recorded. Yeah, that's right, Linux, drinks are usually pretty expensive in nightclubs. That's not the case with this particular meeting, because it's an association that only wants to cover its costs and not make a profit, since it primarily focuses on queer rights and other LGBTQ issues. We need to differentiate a bit here. I'm referring to the operators of this venue, this space that can be rented. It's been around for quite a while. I mean, 25, 30 years. It's a kind of safe space, a venue for all non-heterosexuals, where they can meet. Various meetings and activities take place there regularly. Plus, it can be rented independently for all sorts of events. So, they have this large area where these meetings take place, with, for example, the armchairs and the bar area. They also have conference rooms that they rent out at reasonable rates. This includes all the catering, food and drinks, which they provide at cost price to cover their expenses. So, the costs plus a small percentage to keep everything running, but without the intention of making a profit, because of course every club wants to get the most money out of it, it's not just about covering costs. I like that. I think it makes a lot of sense, because we always have the problem of financing events like this. That's true. Back to the ABDL meetup. Even though I unfortunately couldn't be there, from what I gathered, I thought it was very positive. It will definitely happen again. So, this project wasn't a one-off event we just held once and then it was over. Rather, it's intended to be a regular occurrence, similar to the party. The next planned date is coming up soon. Hopefully, there will be 2 of us there again, so you can meet us. Furthermore, there are other events this year where we'll be. Among them are Puppy Park on February 14, 2026, then the Diaper Dungeon on March 14, 2026, and then Frekdax in Munich on May 9. Those are the next 4 dates. Of course, there are more. We don't want to list them all here. I have several ideas about how we can best organize things for you in the future. I won't reveal that just yet, but there's one thing we can elaborate on a bit more, which didn't quite make it through in our year-end review and outlook for 2026. It's a project of ours where we want to document different diapers and make them available to you. It's intended as a supplement to, or alternative way of presenting, our practical tests. The idea has been around for quite some time. I even started working on a dummy diaper back in 2024. But that got put on hold because we always have this resource issue. That's also why things are going to be a bit different this year. I don't know if everyone is aware of how we run Diaper TV. It's a hobby project for us. That means it takes place in our free time. We both have full-time jobs and are busy with our apprenticeships. So, for us, it's all done after work and on weekends. That makes it quite difficult because our time is limited. Then there are the events we attend, where we also have to prepare things, which naturally takes up a lot of time. It's also important to remember that while ABDL is a big part of our lives, it's not our only focus. We enjoy doing other things in our free time. That's also why, even if we haven't gotten sick, it can sometimes take a bit longer, because a video like this takes roughly a day to make. Finding that time isn't easy, especially if you've had a stressful week and then have other plans for the weekend. Sometimes, you just can't finish a video in one go. It's the same with the diaper database. It's been around for quite a while, but we have a lot of ideas about how we can use it to make a good impression on you. The basic idea is to optimize a platform for diapers. This means we'll enter all the information about diapers, including release dates, absorbency, and so on. Everything that's important in terms of data for someone who's interested in it. Firstly, we've optimized it accordingly, and secondly, independence from external platforms, especially the big tech companies like Google and Instagram, is important to me. We've already seen how we're under pressure because of our dependence on them. This won't get any better in the future. In fact, it's likely to get significantly worse with Trump. It's a tool that can be used, and one that Trump has already used. For example, quite a few companies in the US have had to cut their diversity programs because Trump said, "That's all, we hate that, get rid of that crap." It's difficult for them to say, "Yes, we think that's great, we want to keep it." They could, perhaps, but then they'd have a weak lobbying position, so many don't do it. As far as I know, only Apple remains. They've stood up against it. The rest of the big corporations caved in months ago. That's the current trend. Basically, it doesn't surprise me. I've been critical of this for quite some time, over 10 years now, which is why I don't want to be too dependent on it. I want to offer an optimal presentation for the diapers themselves, where we can, for example, include test results, various other things, and create an archive. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's become increasingly clear to me that when diapers are discontinued, meaning they're no longer produced, the manufacturer stops production, for example, because they weren't profitable enough or the brand no longer exists, whatever the reason, then these diapers are lost. That means they almost completely disappear after a few years. An example of this is the My Dipper from Safe Express. Are you familiar with it? Yes. Are you also familiar with the different versions? Is M the purple one? No, that's Rear Seduction. But you're right about that. It was discontinued too. This will be one of the next products to disappear. Rears announced in early 2025 that they were discontinuing this diaper. Then they produced one last batch. So, they essentially fired up the machine one more time, producing for a few more weeks. This was distributed to shops and retailers. They filled their warehouses and consequently sold them for months. I think some even still have some stock to this day, but they are, after all, remaining stock. That means they're about to disappear. You can already see this clearly with the My Dipper, because it was already on clearance several years ago and therefore hasn't been available for years. That was one of my first colorful diapers from Self Express. They commissioned them. They came in different editions. There was a blue one, we still have a pack of that. Remember? Yeah, the white one, it's in the cupboard. Right, it's in the cupboard. I always find it interesting to compare them. When you put them next to a current pack of Tykables, Rees, or whatever, you can see at a glance how much thicker they've become, even if it's the same number of pieces. So, if both have, say, 10 pieces, you notice this My Dipper pack, which is only a few years old, is simply much shorter, much smaller, much lighter. A lot has changed. These days, they've practically disappeared. You might see them on some older Instagram ABDL profiles that survived all the purchase. If you scroll all the way down, you can sometimes still see a few here and there, but otherwise, they're gone. If you search online, most of the websites are no longer accessible either. Basically, all that's left are some auction sites where someone still has a pack of these and is selling it. Occasionally, there are also shops that have acquired them from somewhere and are now trying to make a lot of money off them. But the core of it is lost. You can't find any information anymore, for example, about the suction power they used to have. I think it's a shame when something like this disappears, because it's a piece of ABDL history that shows us how the scene has developed, what progress we've made, maybe even some setbacks, but in this case, mostly progress. This suspicion was reinforced by a disc. Do you remember that? Yes, it's the biggest ADL forum in the world. Well, the biggest in the world, I'm not entirely sure. But it doesn't really matter now whether it's the biggest, second biggest, or third biggest. What's important, from my perspective, is that it was one of the biggest hubs. It was open for over 10 years, and there were tons of people from all over the world who wrote and asked all sorts of questions about ABDL. There were various guides, including a diaper changing guide. Some people even tested diapers themselves, taking pictures and describing their experiences. All of that is gone in an instant. I even shut down a video because the owner just didn't want to be involved anymore. He's outside the scene, so he's left. He got sick, and that's why he wanted to get rid of everything. I think it's a real shame. That's why I think we should take action against this by creating a kind of archive, a loving archive, while we still have the chance. I've taken lots of pictures and videos myself for our Diaper TV channel. This would be as comprehensive as possible with what we have available. This means we can look back and see what diapers were available in the past, but we can also see the current ones, which are relevant when someone is looking for buying advice, for example. That's what I do in the videos. I don't have anything against videos in principle. But I'm still a fan of the classic web because if I'm looking for something specific. They commissioned them. They came in different editions. There was a blue one, we still have a pack of that. Remember? Yeah, the white one, it's in the cupboard. Right, it's in the cupboard. I always find it interesting to compare them. When you put them next to a current pack of Tykables, Rees, or whatever, you can see at a glance how much thicker they've become, even if it's the same number of pieces. So, if both have, say, 10 pieces, you notice this My Diaper pack, which is only a few years old, is simply much shorter, much smaller, much lighter. A lot has changed. These days, they've practically disappeared. You might see them on some older Instagram ABDL profiles that survived all the purchase. If you scroll all the way down, you can sometimes still see a few here and there, but otherwise, they're gone. If you search online, most of the websites are no longer accessible either. Basically, all that's left are some auction sites where someone still has a pack of these and is selling it. Occasionally, there are also shops that have acquired them from somewhere and are now trying to make a lot of money off them. But the core of it is lost. You can't find any information anymore, for example, about the suction power they used to have. I think it's a shame when something like this disappears, because it's a piece of ABDL history that shows us how the scene has developed, what progress we've made, maybe even some setbacks, but in this case, mostly progress. This suspicion was reinforced by a disc. Do you remember that? Yes, it's the biggest ABDL forum in the world. Well, the biggest in the world, I'm not entirely sure. But it doesn't really matter now whether it's the biggest, second biggest, or third biggest. What's important, from my perspective, is that it was one of the biggest hubs. It was open for over 10 years, and there were tons of people from all over the world who wrote and asked all sorts of questions about ABDL. There were various guides, including a diaper changing guide. Some people even tested diapers themselves, taking pictures and describing their experiences. All of that is gone in an instant. I even shut down a video because the owner just didn't want to be involved anymore. He's outside the scene, so he's left. He got sick, and that's why he wanted to get rid of everything. I think it's a real shame. That's why I think we should take action against this by creating a kind of archive, a loving archive, while we still have the chance. I've taken lots of pictures and videos myself for our Diaper TV channel. This would be as comprehensive as possible with what we have available. This means we can look back and see what diapers were available in the past, but we can also see the current ones, which are relevant when someone is looking for buying advice, for example. That's what I do in the videos. I don't have anything against videos in principle. But I'm still a fan of the classic web because if I'm looking for something specific. I understand that I don't want to watch CCK videos first. I feel the same way. I prefer a blog post, an article, something I can read and skim. That's easier than watching a video. We could create something like that for diapers, too. We can then aggregate this data once we have it all in the database. For example, we can display the thickest diapers, always with the most up-to-date information. I've already made a video that captured the current status at that point. Now, new practical tests are being added, so it's already outdated. The moment we add something, it's visible and can be taken into account everywhere. So we can create lists like that. We can also provide this video content as text so it's readable, along with the images, a few extras, like a Diaper of the Month poll. I think that's great. I also like the idea that you can vote from a list, and every month we reset it and see what the top 3, 5, or whatever the top 5 were with the most votes. I have a few more ideas. I won't reveal them all. One last thing. I envision the shops also being stored in this database. This means we now have a specific diaper, for example, Abu Tiny Tails, and it's linked to the shops where you can buy it. Of course, this includes shops here in Germany, such as a BOEU shop, Dipper Minister, and so on. All the shops that have it in stock are listed there. We regularly check the prices, request them, and display them on the website. This means you can see which shop currently has the best price for that diaper. Furthermore, I'd like us to collect the data at specific intervals, for example, once a day or something like that. Then we could show, for example, that the price of this diaper increased on January 22, 2026, from €25.76 per pack to €27. The idea is to systematically record such price increases and also make them visible for the past, so we can see how they develop. This is the first price increase. There were 5 before this one, to make things more transparent, because there are shops and manufacturers, or brands, that usually don't even produce them themselves, but have them manufactured under contract. These brands operate independently and try to squeeze as much money as possible out of us with their pricing policies. I've already made videos about this. But those are things I just happened to see. I'd like to have this kind of big data analysis, so we can regularly collect the data and present it to you when you want to shop. I can easily imagine that this analysis might reveal other interesting things. Developments, trends that one wouldn't otherwise notice. I definitely think it's very useful, and I expect it will be interesting for you to see what we can glean from it. We'll reveal more about that later. Feel free to subscribe to the channel here so you don't miss community posts, new podcast episodes, or new videos. We're especially looking forward to your feedback on the new podcast, such as what topics interest you or how we can improve it. We definitely want to make more episodes, and I hope you enjoyed it. Stay dry, and see you next time.